This morning, we are hearing reports that somebody from Arizona is among the Americans who recently returned home from a cruise ship at the center of that deadly hantavirus outbreak. The New York Times reporting state health departments for California, Georgia, and Arizona are monitoring passengers. So we've reached out to the state health department to confirm these reports. 3 people ended up dying in an outbreak on board that cruise ship.
So Colton joining us right now, answering some of your questions about the virus. Colton, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Tess and Scott. So those reports suggest that the American passengers are not showing any signs of illness, and doctors as well as the World Health Organization say that most strains of hantavirus can't spread from person to person. Hantavirus is mainly spread by contact with rodents and their droppings, especially when it becomes airborne, posing a risk of inhalation. People are typically exposed to hantavirus around their homes or cabins, or even when they're cleaning out their sheds. However, the Andes strain of the virus can spread between people, and that strain is at the center of this outbreak. But still, transmission is rare, according to doctors, and can be spread through close contact, like sharing a bed or maybe sharing food. The illness starts with flu-like symptoms, usually showing up between 1 and 8 weeks after contact with an infected rodent. But an infection can rapidly progress and become life-threatening. Now, there is no specific treatment or cure, but early medical attention can increase the chance of survival. The most recent data on hantavirus in the U.S. is from 2023. That year, there were 6 reported cases in Arizona. 2 of them ended up being deadly. We'll continue to follow the news of the hantavirus and the infected cruise ship very closely and bring you any developments as we learn more about them. We'll send it back to you in studio.